We will now hear from HSBC, who've been major investors in Sri Lanka for 126 years. Mr. Chris Trill, Global Head of Consumer Services, HSBC, will present on the HSBC HDPL success story in Sri Lanka.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. Really, really appreciate it. We've heard a lot in the last couple of hours. I think I'm going to probably take a slightly different tack and actually share with everyone what it's actually like to be running an organisation within Sri Lanka, and also actually as we look to the future as well, what we think that that looks like as well. Oh, wrong way. Our new branding, although it's not so new anymore. Right, okay, so who am I? Well, I'm fortunate enough to actually have lived in Asia, in South Asia. I lived in Bangalore for the last couple of years, returning to London only a few months ago. And we have 14 service centres dotted around the world, and I spent a lot of time in 4 of them, including Colombo. In fact, Colombo is only an hour and a quarter from Bangalore, and I will let you know that Colombo was probably the nicest city out of the 4, so I chose to spend as much time there as I possibly could. All right, so that's the human side of me, but also the most welcoming group of people as well. So my role is an interesting one. Essentially, what is consumer services? Right? I look after retail banking and private banking operations for HSBC Group. So that's responsibility for about 49 different countries across those 14 service centres and in-country operations. So when I look at Sri Lanka, we've got the Colombo Service Centre, but also I have teams actually within the bank as well that actually report up through into me. Now, I'd never been to Sri Lanka until 4 years ago. Okay, now, as I've referenced, it's actually one of the sites where I actually find the most innovation as well. It's also one of the most proactive, and they're the first to pick the phone up to me and tell me when they've done something successful or they need help, right? Which actually culturally is really, really important for us within HSBC. And yesterday at the Presidential Awards, they also won an award. All right, so, and I woke up to that this morning, so I was very, very pleased about that, and they were the first to actually let me know. And it's been in the Sri Lankan press today. Right, okay, so our presence in Sri Lanka. What I'll do is I'll start with HSBC, the bank, and then I'll actually move into the operations in terms of the part that I'm going to touch on. So, as touched on, we have actually had a presence in Sri Lanka since the 1890s. We are the oldest foreign bank, and we're by far and away the largest. We've got a good relationship with the government. And also, we are the bank that also does the most trade, underpins the most trade for Sri Lanka as well. All right, now, and about 1,300 people actually operate within that bank. Also, since 2004, we set up the service centre. And as touched on, there are 14. There's only one in Sri Lanka. And there's 2,500 people there. The leadership team now, and I was speaking to someone earlier, and they knew the previous centre directors, and they knew actually that they had not been Sri Lankan. For the first time in 11 years, I know that the leadership team of that centre is all Sri Lankan. And I think that is testament actually to the amount of work that has gone in both to the mid-management and those people with the right levels of ambition and seeing the future and therefore elevating themselves as well. And that's probably one of those things that I will touch on. Okay, so if I look at the 2,500, we have a number of teams. So what actually happens in that centre? We underpin HSBC Securities, Global Trade and Receivables Finance is another team, Customer Due Diligence, Financial Crime, what we call banking operations, which in simple language is opening accounts, servicing accounts, and when relevant, closing accounts. Okay. We run hub and core banking, so all of the core banking systems of HSBC are actually configured and run mainly out of a leadership team based from the service centre. Right, we run data management services, and I'm missing one, publishing services, which is essentially an internal advertising agency, and that is actually the person who runs that globally. That role used to be based out of either Hong Kong or London. It's now actually globally based out of Sri Lanka, led by a Sri Lankan, and that person is also our centre director as well. Okay? So 8 teams which serve more than 30 countries and impact more than 350 customer journeys. And operations. So I've said that this location is an integral part of operations. What is operations within HSBC? Well, with the engine room. Okay, every single time, be it if you go into wholesale or a retail operation, right, the transaction of whatever you are doing is going to run through operations, okay? Now, what we're hopeful is we are looking to digitise as much as we can, and I'll touch on that in a couple of minutes around what that means for operations. But essentially, it is banking done on scale, and it is the bit that as a customer, hopefully, it is seamless and you do not see, all right? But if successful, there are significant teams sat behind operations that bring everything to life. Now, historically, a lot of what operations has done has been manual, okay? And as we've actually set up those service centres around the world, we've taken from the in-country teams, we've actually chopped up the process as much as you can and then made it really simple, put it into the service centres and actually then run that process in whichever way it is. But what that means is actually the roles themselves are actually relatively simple and straightforward, all right? I think that that's where it was, all right? We knew as operations, as a leadership team, about 3 years ago, okay, that with the amount of challenges that were coming into the banking marketplace, and some of our competitors, actually that was banking in a historic sense. So we had to prepare ourselves for certain markets today and other markets for tomorrow. So we had this strategy, which is, okay, think 2030, deliver 2020. I can probably let you know that actually the same strategy is going to go to at least 2022, but that's fine, right? But that also means that actually if you're taking a large-scale operation, of which we are discussing the Colombo Service Centre, and we're actually taking that through a period of change, what happens, all right? So if you've been taking relatively simple tasks and making them complex tasks, or you're changing somebody's role, how is that adopted within the locations that you're actually doing that in? And essentially what we're talking about here is we're talking about digitization, moving from analog to digital, all right? We're turning everything electronic, all right? So as a customer, if you walk into a branch, or if you're a wholesale customer, the transaction you do starts electronic and goes all the way through electronic. Okay, as opposed to it being worked on manually. Working with the Sri Lankan team in Colombo, they're one of the most receptive teams anywhere in the world. Actually, they're probably the team that saw it as the best opportunity for them to improve the role that they were doing within HSBC. And culturally, if you go to a number of other markets and you say, do you know what, the job you've been doing for the last 3-4 years, we're actually going to change everything around it, they actually get relatively defensive. I can absolutely say that the overriding culture and response from the Colombo team was absolutely not. We want to embrace that. And what does that mean? Right, okay. Digitalising banking. I'll give you 2 examples. So when I talked about financial crime risk, how has that changed? Well, what we used to do is we used to take large amounts of data, we'd manually sift through it, we'd try and identify customers that we thought warranted investigation, but this was all done manually. Okay, now it is done by machine learning and AI. And what that means to the roles in question, actually within Colombo, is they're now involved in the investigations. Okay, so we took a number of very, very basic roles, and now actually they're doing the delving, the diving in, and making sure that if you bank with HSBC, that we know what type of customer you are, we know what you're doing, how you're doing it, but more importantly, we can support you better in doing that. And that role has changed over the last 3 to 4 years. But actually, the machine learning and the AI is the piece that has been embraced, okay? And that's the key thing. So that's example number 1. Example number 2 is robotics. 3 years ago within operations, we did not have a role called a robotics configurator. Now it is one of the roles that absolutely sits within what we do. If you go to one of our retail banks here and you go and open a bank account, there used to be 90 processes sat behind opening a bank account. Okay, now 90% of that is automated. Even if you go and open it manually, behind the scenes, 90% of it is automated. The people that do the configuration, the people that have built that new process, sit in Colombo. Okay, now everybody thinks of HSBC operations as being a traditional processor, not a tech house. But essentially, the roles are moving from being manual to tech-based. And if not tech themselves, an appreciation and an understanding of. So what does that mean? Right, our future capabilities. What we'll be looking, actually from all 14 of our service centres, but in particularly Colombo, and actually, as I said, has already been embraced. Why do we like it? Literacy. Okay, it's got the highest rate of literacy in any of our locations. All right. And what we also know is that from the education system, actually the vast majority do come through into management as well, right? Which is good, and we export to other countries around the world Sri Lankan talent. We're speaking to a couple of people saying actually there's a real hub in Hong Kong, but it's all originated from Colombo to start with, okay? So it's good for HSBC. English. The English capability, the vast majority of our countries are primary, even though we're everywhere, the business language is English. So in Sri Lanka is very, very well placed for that as well. Politically, it's been stable and we've been supported, right? That's very, very important. And that we don't see changing either. So we know we're in an environment where we can make decisions that absolutely for future years are important and will be maintained. So it's a place that we feel comfortable in terms of increasing the skill set of the workforce and also investing within. And also alongside that as well, there is a cultural piece in terms of, okay, well, if we need different roles in the future and we need different leaders in the future, we need to have an open mindset to start with. And actually we feel that we have that within Sri Lanka. So what I've tried to do just in the last sort of 10 minutes, and I know it's a whistle-stop tour, and I'm going to be around later and also this evening for any questions in terms of what this means. Because as I say, 4 of those 8 teams that I referenced actually report up into me, so I know what they're doing and how they're doing it. I will take questions. I will be as open and as transparent as I can be, all right, both to Sri Lankan delegation and also to any organisations that are thinking of what is it really like, okay? And I'll be as open and transparent as I can be, all right? The other thing is this is oversharing, but I feel I'm amongst friends, okay? I was in a new relationship. And after a few months, I decided to actually go to Sri Lanka for a Sri Lankan wedding. It's the first time I chose to take a new girlfriend to Sri Lanka. I think that's the moment she fell in love with me. Right? So there you go. Just a bit of humanity back into that, just not work. Okay. So thank you very, very much. Okay. Thank you.